Okay, everyone, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Paul Raine. I'm the founder of TILTAL, which is Technology in Language Teaching and Learning. We have a website at tiltal.org, and we also have a Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/tiltal. We're gathered here today to discuss this new technological breakthrough that's been, taking over the news headlines, GPT. And the title of our webinar today is GPT and ELT, Productive, Disruptive, or Destructive. And we're going to try to determine through debate and discussion which of those is the most appropriate label for GPT and ELT. I'd like to introduce my co-presenters. I'm talking today with Philip Kerr, Kevin Ryan, and Joseph Tomei. Philip Kerr is a teacher, trainer, and materials writer who lives in Vienna. His books include Translation and Own Language Activities and 30 Trends in ELT, both from CUP. He blogs about technology and language teaching at http://adaptivelearninginelt.wordpress.com. Kevin Ryan has taught in Barcelona, Chicago, and Nanjing and Tokyo. He teaches courses that usually have the words digital and literacy in the title, both at the undergraduate and graduate level at Showa Women's University. He is a founding member of the JALT Call SIG, a 3-time president of Tokyo PC Users Group, and that was his most intense learning experience. Last but not least, we have Joseph Tomei. Joseph is a professor in the Faculty of British and American Studies at Kumamoto Gakuen University. He has taught EFL in France, Spain, and Japan, and has a long-held interest in computer-mediated communication. He is also interested in the application of functional and typological grammar to language teaching, practical activities in the language classroom and writing instruction, and his doctorate is on using metaphor for EFL writing instruction. The order of speakers today will be myself, followed by Philip, Kevin, and Joe, as you can see the pictures here. Before we start, I'd just like to go through some housekeeping things. Mics are muted and videos are disabled for audience members. Chat is only enabled for sending questions. So if you have a question at any time, please feel free to use the Q&A function, and all of the panelists can see your questions. We will probably answer all the questions at the end. So each of us is hoping to speak for about 20 minutes and then have a 20-minute Q&A at the end. But some presenters may decide to answer your questions sooner than that. This session is being recorded, and highlights of the recording may be shared online. So participating indicates your consent to be recorded. I'm afraid that we don't issue any kind of attendance certificate for this webinar. And just a reminder to remain civil and respectful at all times. And I hope you enjoy the webinar. So I'm going to kick us off, and my presentation will just be kind of an introductory information about GPT. And I'm not sure how much people in the audience already know about GPT, but I'm assuming that you have some knowledge, but you're by no means experts in this technology. So what is GPT? GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer, and the 3 denotes 3rd edition. GPT is a kind of large language model, LLM, which is trained on gigabytes or sometimes even terabytes of text using billions of parameters. An LLM is in turn a kind of neural network, which is in turn a kind of AI. So it's not incorrect to say that GPT is a kind of AI, or GPT is a neural network, or GPT is a language model. All of those are correct. If that's as clear as mud to you, and it may well be, there's another definition here. This actually comes from one of the developers working at OpenAI, and OpenAI is the company behind ChatGPT and other similar models. And it goes like this. What is GPT? It's a text model. It's basically a gigantic neural network with about 175 billion parameters. It's a peculiar kind of neural net called a transformer model, invented about 5 years ago. It's been trained on a large fraction of all the text on the open internet. So many people wonder where the text came from. It basically was scraped off the internet. So you've got the entire Wikipedia on there. You've got the entire Reddit database on there, and every other open page on the internet. The training simply consists of playing the following game over and over trillions of times. Predict which word comes next in this text string. So in some sense, its only goal or intention in the world is to predict the next word. That's what GPT is trained to do. Okay. So what can GPT-3 actually do? Well, I took the liberty of asking GPT what it thought it could do. And this is GPT's response to that question. It says it's a type of language model. It can generate human-like text. It can be fine-tuned to perform a variety of language tasks such as translation, summarization, question answering. It can generate text in a specific style or tone or complete a given prompt. Basically, it's a whole range of things that we previously thought were in the domain of humans. Only humans could ever do these things, and now we're being shown that GPT can do these things to a certain extent. So it can generate text that is grammatically accurate, stylistically authentic, completely original, and in many cases indistinguishable from human authored content. Now, there is some debate about that, but I'm saying not in all cases, but in many cases, it is indistinguishable. Coming on to the ELT acronym, what is ELT? All the panelists have worked in ELT and are currently working in ELT. Of course, it stands for English language teaching. And I think it's just one side of a coin there. So, ELT is one side of it, English language teaching, and the other side is English language learning. Now, the coin metaphor is not accidental because this is all connected to commercialism as well, which Philip writes about a lot and may also talk about today. So that the ELT field, an academic field, but it's also an industry as well. So that's what ELT is, in my opinion. So GPT and ELT, is it productive, disruptive, or destructive? Well, I'm not going to keep you on tenterhooks. I'm going to give you my opinion straight away. I think that GPT will definitely have a disruptive impact on ELT. I think we have no choice about that because it's there and it's been released and we have to deal with it in some way. We could try ignoring it, but I think that probably won't work very well. It may also be productive or destructive in some ways, but I think with those, we have a little bit more of a choice, but we have no choice about the fact that it is definitely going to be disruptive. So first, I'm going to talk about some possible productive uses of GPT in ELT. Now, for those who haven't tried it yet, GPT, a particular version of GPT called ChatGPT is freely available at chat.openai.com. I think GPT can refer to other models, but in this forum, the four of us probably going to be mainly talking about ChatGPT. Now you can access this at chat.openai.com. You have to sign up for an account first, but once you've done so, it is freely available. Now, no one really knows how long it's going to be freely available for. And OpenAI is a commercial entity, and they are going to try to monetize this technology at some point. They've already received multi-billion-dollar investment from Microsoft, but they may be looking to monetize it in other ways as well. So this is a uniquely special thing about ChatGPT as opposed to other language models that are out there. It remembers what the user has said earlier in the conversation. It allows the user to provide follow-up corrections, and it's trained to decline inappropriate requests. Okay, so what Sam Altman, who's the CEO of OpenAI, and his engineers discovered was people wanted to interact with these language models in a conversational way, and they wanted to modify the output they received so to have some kind of memory of the dialogue that's going on there. So that's what ChatGPT does uniquely well that other models don't really do. So I'd like to give some examples of some productive uses of GPT. Basically, you just go to this website. At the bottom here, you can see a little input box, and there you type in your prompt, and then the system will respond to what you have written in there and reply to your request. So for language teachers, you can do things like this. You can say, write a short factual passage about, in this case, elephants, suitable for English language learners. And this is the response that ChatGPT will produce. Elephants are large, intelligent mammals that are native to parts of Africa and Asia, and it goes on like that. I won't read the whole thing. As you can see, it does meet the description that I gave earlier, grammatically accurate and stylistically appropriate. Okay. Now, I added that bit on the end, suitable for English language learners, and ChatGPT will pay attention to those kind of instructions, and it will grade its output depending on what you tell it to do. Yeah. Now, of course, if that passage is a little bit too difficult for your language learners, who maybe at an elementary level, you can then type a follow-up prompt like this: simplify the grammar and vocabulary further. Then ChatGPT will think about that and respond in this way. Elephants are big animals that are smart and live in Africa and Asia. They have long nose, big ears, etc. Okay, so you can see that this is a lot simpler in terms of grammar and lexis than the previous version. And this just opens up a whole Pandora's box of possibilities, in my opinion, because we can take authentic materials from different sources and simplify them easily by running them through ChatGPT, potentially, without breaching copyright. But there is the potential to do that. Yeah. Sorry, someone's asking me to make my screen a little bit bigger, so I'll do that. Yeah. Now, this is something I discovered more recently, that you can actually tell ChatGPT to write something in the style of a certain author who has to be well known. It can't be like, it couldn't be me because I'm not well known, but someone like Douglas Adams, a British author, someone whose body of work ChatGPT has incorporated into its model. And here you can see elephants in the style of Douglas Adams, those majestic beasts of the savannah, you know, so it's kind of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy style description of elephants. Here's an example in the style of Stephen King. Okay, elephants looming in the darkness, giant gray ghosts, their trunks like tentacles of some ancient sea monster. So you can see that there are accusations of ChatGPT producing very bland output, but it can be cajoled into being less bland, especially if you give it an example of what you want. Now, I'm not saying that this is on a par with the actual Stephen King, but it's just a style of writing. Yeah. Okay, so another potentially productive use of GPT is multiple choice questions. Okay, so again, typing in the prompt box, you could put something like this: generate some multiple choice comprehension questions for this passage. And again, this passage just refers back to the thing that you pasted in earlier on. And ChatGPT will produce a response like this: what do elephants eat? Meat, plants, both meat and plants, or fish. And so one of those answers should be correct, and I think it's C. Now, sometimes ChatGPT provides like 2 correct answers, or it provides 4 incorrect answers. Okay, it's getting much better, but it does sometimes still produce factual inaccuracy. So there does need to be human oversight before that output is used in the classroom, for sure, definitely. You can also ask it to generate some vocabulary matching activities as well. So that in this case, I just said, you know, generate some vocabulary activities for this passage, and then it just produced like herbivores, animals that eat only plants, habitat, animals living together. So actually, you can see now that these are actually mixed up. So that animals living together should be the herd one, and habitat should be natural home or environment. So in this case, it's actually mixed up the questions for me. I think in the previous case, it didn't do that. Or sometimes it doesn't do that. So it's a little bit inconsistent. Sometimes it will mix the answers up for you, and other times they'll be in the correct order. So again, you have to be careful about that. So those are just some very, very, very simple and brief examples of what ChatGPT can do. And, you know, at risk of, you know, being cliched, it really is the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more that ChatGPT can do. And I'm sure Philip and Joe and Kevin will talk about more things like that as well today. Now, coming on to some potentially destructive uses of ChatGPT. Now, destructive is a very strong word, and partly we chose it because it rhymes with productive and disruptive. Okay, but and it could be disruptive in some ways. It could be destructive to students' own motivation, perhaps, or it could be destructive to their ability to improve their language use if they're using these tools in the wrong ways. Yeah. So let's say that we have an unscrupulous student who has very low motivation and perhaps low proficiency, and they're given a task by their teacher to write about a homestay experience in Vancouver or whatever. It could be anything. This is just an example. And the student, rather than writing it themselves, they say, okay, I'm going to delegate this task to ChatGPT, and I'm going to hand in the output as my own work. Now, this is the kind of use case that I think has driven a lot of the moral panic amongst academics that you've read about probably in the media. I think it's not that likely a use case, but it could be possible. It could be possible, you know, for some students. So here, I told ChatGPT to write about a homestay experience in Vancouver, written from the perspective of a Japanese learner of English. And I told ChatGPT that the account should contain some grammatical and lexical errors. I did that because I didn't want it to produce a perfect passage. And then because it's too good to be true, the teacher might know, oh, there's no chance that my student wrote this, whatever, you know. So you can actually tell ChatGPT to write in an imperfect way. Now, OpenAI are constantly making little tweaks to ChatGPT, and sometimes it rejects the request to write badly, okay, because it says that bad grammar is immoral. ChatGPT has a bit of a strange moral compass. They're trying to fix it. They're trying to prevent it from spouting, you know, toxic statements and things like that. But sometimes it goes a little bit too far. And I don't think that asking it to be grammatically incorrect is immoral, but it's a bit inconsistent anyway. But you can see here that it did produce a text in this case, and it said, I went to Vancouver for vacation. I stay in homestay. My host family is so kind and friendly. Now, as for me as a teacher, if I received this kind of thing from a student, I probably wouldn't suspect it as having been written by AI because it contains mistakes. Yeah. Okay. So, of course, we're all concerned about plagiarism. It's not a new problem, okay? It's been around for decades, and we have various methods of dealing with plagiarism. Perhaps we can deal with the threat of plagiarism from ChatGPT in the same way that we've always dealt with it, and by having students do written exams in test conditions, things like that. By the way, using ChatGPT to commit plagiarism has now been termed AI-gerism or agerism by the media. So if you ever encounter that term, that's what it means. I noticed in my own studies, I'm actually taking a PhD right now, and it says when you submit a paper, it says that you must not have received help from any other human, any other person. And I think that schools will have to change their policies and the wording of their policies to say you cannot receive help from any other person or artificial intelligence in order to cover these new technologies. Now, if you are deeply concerned about the risk of students plagiarizing with ChatGPT, there are some things you can do to prevent that. OpenAI themselves have been reported to be working on a watermark system where basically it would be possible to tell if a text had not been changed, and then you paste that text into OpenAI, it would tell you whether or not that text came from ChatGPT or not. Now, that feature has not been released yet, but it has been announced in the media. And it looks like they're taking these concerns very seriously. But there is a video with Sam Altman, the CEO, saying that it's ultimately going to fail because a determined student will always find a way around it. Now, I think as long as we can stop the opportunistic students from doing so, we don't have to worry quite so much about the determined students, because the determined students will be the ones who do the task properly. Okay, but if we can stop the opportunists, that will be quite good. There are other sites as well, GPT-0, writer.com/AI content detector, and another one which is too long to read out. I've had the most luck with GPT-0, and I did try various different passages that I've generated with OpenAI and pasted it in, and it says, you know, it analyzes the passage based on what it calls burstiness and perplexity. And I'm not going to go into those because I'm not really sure myself what they are, but that's how ChatGPT analyzes passages. And if the burstiness and perplexity are not sufficiently bursty and perplex, it will basically determine that it was written by AI. Okay. The upshot is that there is a tool out there available right now that will tell you to a good degree of certainty whether a text has come from ChatGPT or not. So please try GPT-0 if you're concerned about that. Okay, I'm reaching the end of my presentation time, so I'm just going to speed up a little bit here, talk about some ways that ChatGPT could potentially enhance the language learning process. And I think the main way we could do this would be thinking about language learning in terms of communicative competence, which was a concept put forward by Canale and Swain in 1981. And they argued that, you know, to learn a language, it means that we have to be grammatical competence, social linguistic competence, discourse competence, and strategic competence. I'm quite optimistic about the possibility of ChatGPT to help students develop these competencies. Also, there's a Vygotsky concept of ZPD, where someone with more knowledge or skills than the learner can help the learner to reach a level that they couldn't reach on their own. And I think ChatGPT could be a more knowledgeable other. That's the phrase that Vygotsky uses. Normally, he used it to refer to teachers or peers, but perhaps we could also include AI in the category of more knowledgeable other, and then it could be it could help students to reach a higher level that they couldn't reach on their own. Okay, thank you very much for your attention. If you want to read more from me, please visit my website, paulcenter.com or tiltal.org. I'm now really delighted and happy to introduce Philip Kerr, who will continue the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Just one second while I share my screen. Okay, Kevin, I see you've got your unmute on. Could you just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me and see my screen? Okay. Okay, lovely. Thanks very much.
Yes.
Okay. Cheers. Thank you, Paul. I'd like to say thank you to Paul for inviting me to come along. He invited me to participate in this, knowing very, very well that I was likely to disagree with quite a lot of what he was going to say. So that was courageous of you. But I'm not going to take a particularly contrarian position on this. But I will be arguing quite clearly, I think, that I see nothing particularly disruptive in this technology. Certainly not disruptive in the Clayton Christensen sense of disruptive. It's not going to change fundamentally the way we approach what we're doing. Well, like a lot of other people, you know, when it comes to talking about ChatGPT, I asked ChatGPT to do some of the work for me. So to give an idea, I asked it to come up with a title for my short presentation. And it offered this game changer or a gimmick. It took me quite a while to get it to come up with the suggestion. It came up with some really dull stuff. I said, I want something a bit more witty, a bit more snappy. And this was finally the wittiest and the snappiest thing it could come up with. For this sort of too long didn't read or too long couldn't be bothered to listen kind of people out there, the answer to the question, is it a game changer or a gimmick? Well, I would argue it's actually neither of these. It's neither. Okay, let's move on. I'm going to be fairly brief in this presentation. The first point I want to make is that ChatGPT is very new. I mean, you see the Wikipedia entry here. It's talking about how it appeared in November 2022. Now, there have been other similar models out there. I've been playing around with one called, I forget what it's called now, Neuroflex or something of that kind. Now, that's maybe a drug for quite some time. But this one is different because it's free, or it's free for the moment. I think we need to remember that it is very early days. I'm going to suggest or argue that the key to understanding ChatGPT is as a tool. And as a tool, I think we could compare it to other tools which changed the way we worked. Tools like Google, which suddenly made life very different, certainly for anyone involved in the production of materials. Tools like YouTube, even tools like Word, but also tools that you get on a standard smartphone, things like voice recorder or camera. And it's taken really quite a long time for people to come up with a really rich variety of the sorts of things that we can do in language teaching which use these tools. So I think it's reasonable to assume that as time goes by, and assuming that we still have access to a piece of software like ChatGPT for free, that people will be coming up with more interesting stuff. The main bulk of what I'm going to say is I'm going to simply describe a number of activities which I have come across in various sources online which are using ChatGPT. These are activities which I like. I'm going to simply describe them and then make some sort of commentary on these activities as I go. These activities, as I say, are drawn from the work of other people. I've put together a Word document. Paul, what did we decide in the end with this? We're going to make this available?
Yes, we'll be sharing some resources at the Tiltal homepage and the Tiltal Facebook group after the forum is finished. Yeah. Okay,
lovely. So this will be accessible afterwards, and it's linking to what I think is some of the best stuff out there. Some names I'll mention now: a guy called Sam Gravel, American, working in Germany, and Svetlana Kandibovich. I'm not sure about your pronunciation, Svetlana, because I know you're here, who is also doing some interesting work. So I'm going to be linking to that. So here are the ideas that I'd like to describe, and I've categorized them really quite simply. I'm starting with texts as vehicles of information. And I'm starting with texts as vehicles of information, to use that terminology, because in many ways, it would seem that that is what most people are doing with ChatGPT at the moment. They're using it to generate texts for people to read. But I've also started with it because there are still plenty of people who would argue that in terms of language acquisition, the single most significant factor in learning a language is having extensive and multiple opportunities to interact with comprehensible text of one kind or another. So this whole business of providing access to comprehensible text is something which people have picked up on very fast with ChatGPT. At the moment, the interface is just text, but it is a relatively trivial matter to convert that text into spoken language, and it is a relatively trivial matter to convert any your spoken input into a textual format that ChatGPT can process. It's not difficult to do, and it is likely before long that there will be a spoken interface. So at the moment, then, it's reading, but that is unlikely to continue for very long. At the same time, the people at OpenAI are talking about the possibility not just of generating written text, but video text in the near future. The technology is there. It's extremely complex and extremely expensive, but we could imagine a situation where, rather than asking a question of ChatGPT, it would actually produce an animated an animated video response. Perhaps it could even produce a 20-minute webinar slot of this kind. Why not? Either using kind of quite sophisticated technology to make it look as though I'm speaking, or having some sort of avatar representing my face. So those are the ways that people are using it most of the moment, and the way it's likely to go. And I think this is significant, but there is one very big caveat. AI is also being used to generate music, and it's also being used to generate art, and it's being used already to generate video of various kinds. One of the things, though, that we know about this is that however immediately interesting AI-generated image is, when you know that it's been generated by AI, you begin to lose your interest. And the same is true with music. I could play, for example, two pieces of music, one by Bach and one generated by AI in the style of Bach, and you might find them equally interesting. But one of the things that has been established quite clearly in terms of psychology is when we know that something is artificial intelligence, we lose interest in it. And this kind of provides a big challenge for AI-generated text of whatever kind. It becomes more interesting if we are unethical and lie about it and pretend it's been written by somebody else. And there might be an argument for being to lie about it in order to push the motivation levels, because if we're honest, the motivation levels are likely to drop off or disappear. So those are my kind of reservations about that. But here are a couple of ideas that I've come across, which I rather liked. I'm describing them as exemplars rather than copy exactly as they are. The first one, and I say it's linked, the link is on the handout, is from somebody called Andrew Heft. And he input the following prompt. I'm trying to improve my understanding of the Arab-Israeli conflict. Develop a creative choose-your-own adventure story and keep asking me to choose an option before moving on to the next part of the story. So ChatGPT seems to be able to do this quite well, to create interactive text, which you have some kind of part in deciding how far it goes. I'm not sure that I would want to trivialize the Arab-Israeli context in this way, the conflict in this way, but you could do it with anything else. So I really, really like the idea. I've not had a chance to try it out yet, but this idea of interactive stories seems to me a good one. Of course, these things exist, maze stories, they've been around for quite a long time, but writing them takes forever, and then programming them, it takes a while if you're doing it online too. This kind of thing is a fairly immersive activity. It's going to work best with fiction. It's not going to work terribly well with factual information. It's going to work better, presumably, with younger learners than with older learners. But it is a kind of fun thing to do. It lends itself well to classroom work, since if different students are following different paths through the individualized stories, it creates immediately a kind of jigsaw situation where they can then compare what they've discovered afterwards, share your story, and they'll all have different patterns. That seems to me a very rich way of spending quite a substantial amount of time in class, combining reading and listening, and of course, them listening as well. So I think that's a really lovely idea, using ChatGPT to generate something interesting textually. A second idea, which I rather liked, although it's very simple in many ways, it just has one added feature. And this is from somebody called Dustin Shamaul. I'm not sure about the pronunciation. And he wrote this as his prompt. Please write the first paragraph of a short story. The scenario is a dystopia where global warming and an atomic war has made Earth uninhabitable. So he goes through it paragraph by paragraph in this form. So there's some element of interactivity because you can push it in a particular direction. But what I like about the added feature, if you like, is that his next prompt is, please provide the most difficult vocabulary in this text with translations. This is something which ChatGPT doesn't do terribly well. It really doesn't have much of a notion of level, despite what Paul was suggesting earlier on. It really doesn't do it terribly well. It will miss some difficult vocabulary, and it will include others which are far too easy, as the example from Dustin Shamaul on his video shows. But it does give you a start to this, and it makes it quicker for a teacher to identify this vocabulary simply by doing editing. So the teacher has to come in, do some editing, because the software cannot do it reliably. And I will suggest that it never will be able to. The idea of writing a text at B2 level is highly problematic, because it presupposes that B2 is something which really is the same for everybody. And I'm not sure we could say that any given text for a particular reader would be at a particular level. It's more complex than that. Still, it's a nice idea. With a little bit of teacher editing, you can tidy up the list. What Dustin then suggests is that you ask the software to provide translations in the first language of the learners, which it will do very quickly. And then, of course, once you've got these keywords and the translations, you can simply export them into a flashcard system for spaced practice. So it's a nice little idea. So there's some good ones, I think quite good ones, using texts as vehicles of information. More often, I suppose, we are used to using more often, and perhaps regrettably, we're used to using texts as linguistic objects. There's again a long history here how we might use texts or mine texts to find interesting linguistic features. But most of the texts that come in the published material, both online and off, starts from the kind of language that you want to show in the text, and then the text is written around it. As a coursebook writer, I've done this more often than I care to remember. I'm teaching, or we're presenting the present perfect or whatever it may be, and we've got to write a text which includes at least 5 instances of it. ChatGPT can do this reasonably well. And Sam Gravel gave a really interesting example, I thought, of this particular approach. He teaches in a business English context. And he gave us a prompt: write me a list of the top 20 most important accounting terms in English, and use those terms in a text about accounting in 2022. Then create a version where the terms are replaced with gaps. And he checked the information that ChatGPT came up with, the list that it came up with one of his students who works in accounting. And the feeling seems to be that ChatGPT was able to do this quite well. So identifying key terms and then writing texts which include them seems to work pretty well on ChatGPT. My third category is simplified, just checking the time, simplified and elaborated texts. I mentioned just briefly earlier on that ChatGPT has a problem with levels. It understands ages much better than it understands levels, as we would understand levels. And I think one of the reasons for that is that the data on which it's been trained is overwhelmingly American, or presumably is American. So when it comes to language learning, it assumes that we're talking about English language learners in a North American context, rather than English language learners in some other kind of context. So it's kind of used to the idea of, what kind of problems might an 11-year-old English language learner in Detroit have, but it doesn't really do terribly well, and it probably never will be able to do terribly well with saying this is a B1 learner of English with, let's say, Japanese as a first language, who is 14 years old. There are too many variations there. So it can simplify texts, and you see in the example that Paul gave, where you ask it to write in the style of, that it can copy styles quite well, but it's a fairly crude approximation of styles, and when it comes to levels, it doesn't do it brilliantly. So you can ask it to produce simplified text, so the text that you input, but you'd have to check, and you'd spend probably almost as much time checking it as you would rewriting it or editing it yourself. I think a more interesting potential here is elaborated texts, where you start off with a fairly simple text and ask it to produce a more elaborate version, i.e. making it more challenging, and this it does rather better. So the use of elaborated texts in terms of extending learners' range, complexity, is quite rich in potential. Parallel texts as my next category, I've kind of lumped together. First of all, translations. The technology behind ChatGPT for translating is good. I've been looking at it in French and German, and as far as I can see, it's comparable with the best online translation tools out there. These translation tools are moving along fast. DeepL is introducing a new kind of editing service for some languages. Things are getting better very, very fast. So if you want to use translation in some way, and I can't even begin to give examples because there's so many, but let's say you're going to do some kind of text based on some sort of activity, based on an English text with a translation into the learner's language, then ChatGPT is wonderful at producing that. The other interesting area is narrow reading. This is the idea that learners will benefit from reading quite a few texts on the same topic. They will benefit primarily in terms of lexical development because they are likely to come across similar kind of lexical patterns and lexical categories in these texts. So this is called narrow reading, reading the same kind of, same sort of text, reading different texts on the same sort of topic. An example of this might be from the real world. Let's say taking a particular topic in the news and then reading about it from 3 different news sources. It's an activity which I rate very highly. Students are not always all that positive about doing it, but it's something which I think they will benefit from. Here's an example of how Sam Gravel has done it, which I really liked, although I wouldn't use this particular example, but I think it's a rich and imaginative idea. He put into the prompt, write 3 book reviews for Stephen King's Dreamcatcher. 1 review should be positive, 1 negative, and 1 neutral. That was the first prompt. Now, list vocabulary and collocations for describing stories from the reviews above. And the program generated this list of collocations, which was a good list, a fairly reliable list. You need to quickly edit it. He then quickly edited the text, taking out things which he didn't think were relevant, and then showed the learners this list of collocations from the texts. He showed them these collocations, and they had to decide as a task whether they thought this collocation came from a positive, a negative, or a neutral review, which is quite a nice way into it. And he did that before they actually read the texts themselves. So a nice kind of structured approach to the reading with a strong lexical focus. So another way of using parallel texts. Explanations and language practice exercises, I don't want to talk about at all. My view is we have far too much of this stuff online already. We don't need AI to generate any more of this crap. Thank you very much. Next, and my last category, feedback on learner language. Now, a lot of people have been talking about the use of ChatGPT for getting feedback. It's okay-ish. It seems to be better at commenting on organization of writing and ideas than it is on language accuracy, because as with all of the other software that's out there, identifying errors is extremely hard. Identifying what is an error and what is a legitimate variation is harder still, because there must be some kind of norm that it measures it against. So if you want to promote in your particular context elements of translanguaging, well, then ChatGPT is completely lost. So it's kind of okay-ish, but it's simply not reliable. And it's much like other forms of automatic writing evaluation. Things like the Write and Improve program, for example, it can get up to about 90% accuracy, but it will identify things which it thinks are wrong, which are not wrong. And it will identify things, it will not identify things which are wrong. So since it's not entirely reliable, there is a danger with using it in this form, and I would recommend not to do so. There are other things out there like Grammarly, which has kind of got the same kind of reliability rate, but it does lead to a normalization, and it will say things like, it will encourage learners to change an element because they think it's got bad style, whereas I think what it's recommending them to change is perfectly acceptable and should be left. So I wouldn't use it for that. Some lessons that I draw from this. All of this stuff can help teachers be very productive in the way that they design and plan lessons, in the same way that using Google, Word, YouTube, and so on, voice recorders can help us to be productive. But all of it requires quite substantial editing because you can't trust it for a minute, and there's no reason to suspect that we will ever be able to trust it enough. The ideas that I've given, I think, and I chose them because I thought they were making good use of the technology, but how good an idea is doesn't actually depend on the technology. It depends on the ideas, the creativity, and the understanding of language learning processes that the teachers bring to it. And there's nothing that ChatGPT is going to do to change that. It's not going to change the way that people teach. If anything, it's going to reinforce the way they teach. The creative, imaginative, informed language teachers will probably be able to do a more exciting job as they can with other technologies, but for others, no. The key thing to remember too is all of this requires quite a bit of time. So I see lots of productive potential, but I can't really see anything that's destructive or disruptive. The last topic I want to turn to is learning rather than teaching, self-directed learning. And I think we should be quite quick about this. This is an example again from Dustin Shamal, where he suggests that learners could use ChatGPT as a conversation partner. You'd need to build in text-to-speech and speech-to-text software with this. There is a lot of talk about ChatGPT becoming a chatbot. There is a lot of talk about ChatGPT and OpenAI developing general artificial intelligence. But they're not there yet, and there are reasons to suspect that they may not ever get there. This is a narrow model of intelligence designed to do relatively narrow tasks. In order for learners to learn autonomously with a chatbot, they have to have general intelligence, because in the end, it's not very motivating to talk to a machine. There are other issues too. We don't yet have any kind of chatbot which can generate intelligent, non-domain specific conversation. And it may be that we will never really quite get there, although we might get to a good approximation of it. We don't have anything which is reliable in terms of speech recognition and generation. All of these programs are trained on particular speech models. And as soon as somebody comes from a different speech community, the software has problems recognizing it. And that's unlikely to change because it would require masses more training data than is ever likely to be invested in. We have an issue with error detection and the feedback on errors. But the biggest issues are probably that even if AI could do all of these things, could it solve the question of learners' self-regulation? And there's no reason to suspect that it could. We have a huge amount of technology out there which learners can use. And even when learners know what they should be doing, they tend not to do it. They don't know how to self-regulate themselves without help, and they don't know how to motivate themselves. So it's not really going to resolve the self-regulation and motivation problems. Final thought, if we did have general intelligence, artificial general intelligence, which could answer all of these challenges, who would need to learn English anyway? So my conclusion then is simply that, is it productive? Yes, it could be quite productive in both good and bad ways. Will it disrupt the way we go about teaching? No, almost certainly not. Will it destroy anything? I suspect not. Thank you, and apologize if I overrun. I'll stop my screen share.
Thank you very much, Philip. Yes, if you have questions for Philip, please feel free to use the Q&A function, and hopefully we'll be able to address them at the end of the forum today. I'd like to now welcome Kevin Raine to speak. If you could share your screen, Kevin, that'd be great.
Are we okay? Can you hear me?
We're good. It's 6:47. So yeah, if you just, whenever you're ready to start, please go ahead.
That sounds good. Just a second here. There we go. Here's the title. This is the title of mine, neither here nor there. But I want to focus in my session on the role of the teacher. Before I begin, thanks to Paul and Phil and Joe for this opportunity. And also, before we begin, one of my favorite quotes from a science fiction author: "The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed yet." In this session, I'm not going to answer, will I have a job in the next 5 years? But I just want everyone to notice that this advancement will come at an irregular rate, depending on where you are. I do want to look at the role of the teacher here and realize that there are different kinds of teachers in teaching. And some of those kinds will go away, and most will change, I think. It is disruptive. I think this is even though it's a very specific technology, it is generally can be used in many different ways. So I think it's as much of a revolution as the personal computer. And I think it'll have wide-ranging changes, but not as quickly as some think anyway. I want to deconstruct or analyze all the different parts of What does a teacher do? What is the role? What other kinds of things we can do? And I do want to jump back to 2010, which I think is a similar situation. In 2008, I attended the first MOOC. It was run by 3 Canadian professors. One of them was Stephen Downes. And by 2010, it was really getting going, and they had another Coursera was being developed, and they had hundreds of thousands of students studying all of a sudden online. And Stephen Downes thought, well, this was kind of silly because people were saying this is the end of the university, and this will change teaching forever. Another thing that was involved was YouTube was about 5 years old at that point. It was just starting to really gain traction. And a man called Salman Khan started posting a bunch of videos about mathematics and to teach through YouTube. And so again, those two things kind of came together. Everybody was kind of like they are right now, a lot like this. So Stephen sat down and he said, what does actually a teacher do? And can this YouTube or MOOCs, can they actually replace a teacher like that? So let's look at those. The first role is the learner. And as a teacher, you should exemplify how you learn to your students. And it's one of the most powerful ways you can do to teach. Another one is a collector. You find materials and bring them all together, always on the lookout for new materials. The curators, once you get those materials, you organize them and put them together and get them ready to use. I call that my arsenal of teaching materials, but you are a caretaker in all of that. An alchemist is a person that takes maybe one video of Taylor Swift and another video of heavy metal, and you put that together, the sound and the images, and mix them all up, and it makes a new video. So this alchemy is to use materials that are there and then adapt them specifically for your needs. A programmer, I'm not talking about computer programmer here. This is to develop courses. The perfect example is the syllabus. The teachers write a syllabus. Salesperson is a person that talks. A professor, of course, professes ideas, champion an idea or a set of ideas. Number 7, a convener. Gets people together, put them together. That perhaps is not so strong as a professor because those are in class, but in many other situations, you need to bring people together. Coordinator. Organize groups, set expectations, logistics, kind of boots on the ground kind of teaching, aspect of teaching. A designer is to create spaces for learning. Now, this is either online or in the classroom. You have to build things and make it easier to learn. Coach. Now, coach is different from a trainer, but the idea is to improve, to get creative synergy between people in the groups, improve the group chemistry. But for individuals, you're kind of the guide on the side, but also you're in the corner supporting the individual students and giving advice, and but always toward the team goals. And agitator is to create an itch the learner has to scratch. I find that, for example, in TBLT, the tasks that you create that require use of English language to be able to finish is something like that. It's an agitator. Facilitator, make it easier, comfortable, safe, lower the anxiety, and move the conversation forward. Don't let it stagnate. Okay, and then just work between groups and students. Tech support. Now, tech support is not like, how do I fix my microphone? But it's to understand the needs of the students and make things possible where students are having problems. So it's not just technology, it's all the whole technology of learning language, which does not have to include machines. The moderator is kind of the opposite of facilitation. Facilitation, you get people to go up and run. This is kind of putting a border and outside and to make sure that everyone is working together and pulling in the same direction. Number 15, the critic, of course, critical thinking. You have to ask questions, evidence, logic, and also give opinions and actually encourage that with the students as well. Lecturer, okay, and that's traditional. You take a lot of information and make it easy to understand, hopefully. But it could be teachers or speakers at a conference or even YouTubers. A demonstrator, this is one of my favorite demonstrators, Bob Ross. He demonstrates how to make paintings. So yeah, it's just a mentor. This is more of a personality trait, and to get followers or to follow someone else, and mentor mentee is usually something that is extracurricular in many ways. A connector, one that puts two different fields together. For example, education and technology you put together to make ed tech. But also that means to find new ideas and connects to old. So I'm connecting this old idea about MOOCs and things now to this new situation. So this presentation is an example. 20, theorizer. So you can explain and use generalizations. So we have inductive and deductive reasoning up and down the ladder, and it leads to different worldviews, hopefully to challenge students to get out of their comfort zones and really think beyond what they have been told. The sharer, so you can share in class. Oh, I found this great new, thing, or always excitedly, or telling good stories. That's also important. And evaluator. So it's more than just giving grades. There's also formative and summative. And it's talking about your own research, as well as even how you perform in class. So you evaluate in many different directions, not just for the students. And the bureaucrat, and where you contribute to the system. There's some kind of accountability. You keep records and statistics, all of those. So those are the 23 that he put in 2010. And I thought, well, I read through the article. It's quite a long article, and I've got the link at the end. But that article, it was hard to digest because there were so many different roles. And so I thought, well, let's organize it and remix it. So in 2010, I took that and put it into categories. So the first category is the admin roles, with the bureaucrat, evaluator, and programmer writing the syllabus. And materials development, those four there. And motivation. Now these categories I just put together. You might have different categories. And here it should be convener, not convener. And conveyance, lecture and demonstrate. Class management. That's my favorite category, the one that I really like the best. And thinking. And that's usually done outside of the class, sometimes, yeah, inside. But now that's 2010, and I thought, well, he does things about educational technology, not about language specifically. So I thought, why not in 2010 adapt that to my situation? And so this will be a little bit narrow for some people, but that's my situation at that time, was a university in Japan. So the administrative roles were pretty much spot on. The programmer became choosing the textbook instead of the syllabus, oftentimes, but I wanted to add translator because that oftentimes was necessary to do administration. And materials development in 2010, I didn't do much curation, and there wasn't much of alchemy going on, or not making of new materials, but there was collection for supplementary materials, and there was some design. I added tape player. In those days, basically a personal tape player. You get up and read something out loud so that students could do listening to replace in a way. So motivation, convener was not at all important. It was all kind of given in required courses for students, connectors either, but you did have to sell the course and you did have to share information quite a bit. So that was important. Conveyance, the lecturer and demonstrator were the same. A loud reader, again, reading aloud was, or something like that, to use yourself as a way to convey samples of English language, in my case, English. Class management got really complicated. The agitator was not very much, how do you say it, culturally accepted in Japan. But I did have quite a bit of L2 enforcer, speak English, not Japanese. It became a manager of the textbook, and the tech support was moved from motivation into class management. And thinking, not much change from regular. Now, with ChatGPT, we need to update these a little bit and look at what changes there might be because of ChatGPT. So I would think the administrator role, the bureaucrat, will pretty much remain the same, and the programmer as well, but the evaluator will become much more important, I think. And it's not just evaluation of grades and things like that, but to evaluate, you need to really have a good bead on every one of your students and to be able to help them more often individually than it is by a class. And so your evaluation criteria needs to really up your game. Materials development is, I think, a key area that ChatGPT will really help us quite a bit in making materials, and you can curate and put things together and design them. There will be a lot more freedom. I think textbooks authors might be shaking in their boots now, a little bit afraid. Extensive reading people. I don't know if you're writing any books for that. Students may be able in the future just to put in a prompt and get their own extensive reading on whatever subject that they need. They will need guidance though. Motivation, again, not much change there as far as motivation. Maintaining, watching out for cross multilingual use of ChatGPT might be something to look at. Conveyance, lecture demonstrator. The prompt engineer is a person that shows students or teaches students, trains students how to use the prompt to get the best information from ChatGPT. And so I think that will become an important part of teaching. Class management, I think coach will become a really, really important. It focuses on the human aspects of learning. And I think that's where we're going to shine. To add a challenger instead of, and again, L2 enforcer will become important. Instead of text manager, it will become project manager. And of course, tech support for use of ChatGPT will also become much more important. Thinking, again, being the learner and showing your students what the learner is, I think will become much more important. So while I can't actually say what's going to happen with ChatGPT and how will it change the thing, the environment in the future for teaching. I think if you kind of look at these roles and kind of adapt and think about these, that you can actually forge a way into the future, no matter what brings with it, so that you can find what how to continue on and to be able to use to teach. I have some final thoughts here, but this would run another 10 minutes, and I don't think I have 10 minutes, so I'm going to stop here, and I'll leave these in the deck, and maybe we can think if you have any questions later. So I'm going to run through all of these at the end, and just say that the last slide here, I've got a link to the slides and links and my website, Edge of Call. And I'm also doing a course at ITDI Pro about using new technology. So that's all for me. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Kevin, very much indeed. I think all of us have had to zoom through the last part of our slides, haven't we, so far? So, it's a very deep topic, this. So at this point, I'd like to welcome Joe to the podium, and he'll see us through to the finish line today. So thanks, Joe. When you're ready, it's 7:05. When you're ready, please begin. And so we can't hear you yet, sorry. There's no sound coming through. Try again. If you're streaming your microphone from there might
That
be
should work. That should work.
now we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. And I'm just going to show you my background. Sorry, I was trying to figure out how to do it, but we'll just go ahead and do this just to get started.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
So my name's Joe Tone, and I teach at a small private university in Japan. Kevin and I are in the same kind of boat. We're at our term break. So consequently, we can take a little step back. We don't have to think about using ChatGPT in the classroom. I notice there's people from all over the world, but my viewpoint's going to be mainly from Japanese students, which is actually a pretty, sad to say, kind of not the highest level group. There was a report on the CIFAR scale, and it said that in 2014, they estimated 75% of third-year upper secondary students were at the A1 level in reading and listening, while 85% were at the A1 of writing and speaking. So, and 2017, miraculously, that went up, but I'm not so sure how much that went up or how they did that. But my talk's going to be divided into 3 sections. I want to do a prologue to get us all on the same page. And then I'm going to talk about some speed bumps, potholes, and dead ends. And then lastly, why it won't matter to some of us. And that's probably more speculative. But let's start with the prologue. Yes, ChatGPT dropped in November of 2022, but it's been floating around for about a year, maybe even 2 years. And I was as shocked, I think, as everyone else when I saw how good it was. But when I looked back, I realized that I'd been dealing with it in a number of different frameworks. My seminar students, I was using it to generate ideas. And here's just a small selection of the kind of writing assistant apps that are out there. And almost all of them are on a freemium model where they give you 3 or 4 chances and then they start asking you for your credit card. And because I didn't want my students to do that, use their credit card, I would hop around to different ones and say, put in your idea for your thesis, get some ideas about what to write. And these are there were tons of these, and I didn't really think much of it because they're pretty much constrained, but they're all built on top of ChatGPT. Philip mentioned chatbots, and there are a number of chatbots that are also built on ChatGPT. This is Replica. There's sort of a problematic aspect because a lot of it is based on male companionship and thirst, and it's a little icky, but they're floating around out there. So this, I think that ChatGPT has actually insinuated itself into our lives a lot more than we think. And it's just in November that we kind of were slapped in the face with it. This was another interesting thing. CNET had said they were using AI written articles before. And since most of the writing on the internet is by freelancers, I suspect a lot of them were using ChatGPT to generate a lot of content. And now I have to wonder, well, ChatGPT stopped in 2021, but our future version is going to end up using text that ChatGPT created, creating sort of a snake that's swallowing its own tail. I mean, it's just using the same text and recycling it through. Now, it's not just ChatGPT. There was the Google engineer in July who said that the Google chatbot was sentient, and a lot of people kind of said, oh yeah, what an idiot. But now when we look at ChatGPT, we kind of see, I don't think it's sentient, but I can see how someone could get fooled. And here is, on the side, there are some other models that are floating around, that are getting used, that are getting looked at. It's really interesting because the first one is Google's model, which they said that they don't want to put out there because it might be too dangerous. BERT, which is bidirectional, is actually the one they use for Google searches. The other ones, the last one is sort of the one that I kind of want to focus in just a bit. It's WuDao, which is a Chinese LLM, and it's multimodal. So it's taking in images, possibly voice, I'm not sure. And it has 10 times as many parameters as ChatGPT. Now, there's an interesting kind of difference culturally, I think, if you go on YouTube, and all of these links are going to be in a page that I'll share with Paul that he can share, so you can go back and take a look at this stuff. But there's this YouTube video where they announce a student who is enrolled in Tsinghua University, who is actually a construct of WuDao. And I can't tell if it's just ironic or if this construct is going to get a diploma, but it basically, the construct is saying, yes, I'm really happy to be researching with this professor. So there is a difference in approach to what AI does in this Asian context versus the Western context. And I'll get back to that at the very end, if I can get through. Last thing in this first section is there was a Google AI researcher named Timit Gebru, who was fired when she wanted to publish a paper. And it was called On the Dangers of Stochastic Parrots. Can Language Models Be Too Big? And her stuff is worth reading, but I want to point you to Emily Bender, who's a linguist at University of Washington. And she's got a lot of good things to say, a lot of good points about how these models work and what they mean for us. So please take a look. She's also got podcasts. And I just want to pull out one quote that she did. The word understanding is heavily loaded. It carries strong connotations of a system that has right systems and causal structures in place. All we know about LLMs is that they are powerful statistical summaries of their training data. So there's going to be a lot of things that a chatbot, a ChatGPT is not going to produce or not going to realize it's producing, because it's just basically copying what its training data is. And of course, this has been a big issue in terms of sexism and racism, but it's also, if you think about it, a big problem in terms of foreign languages, foreign learners learning English. So go to the next section, speed bumps, potholes, and dead ends. I do think ChatGPT is going to be really important, but it's really important to understand how it's working so we can hopefully predict how we're going to face it. The public beta, I assume, is going to close down. They've already made an announcement that they want to do a ChatGPT Pro, where you pay $50 to get pro access. Now, what made ChatGPT so good? Initially, it was ChatGPT 3, and it was producing lots of stuff, but it was pretty much unconstrained. And they added something called Instruct GPT. And this YouTube video is an explanation of Instruct GPT. And basically, the Instruct GPT was, and this may be metaphorical, but was a filter or a cap or kind of a window that controlled what ChatGPT was producing. And when they added this to it, it was good enough. And some of the articles, some of the interviews have said that improvement prompted them to make it an open beta. Now, I'm not sure about that. They may have been doing it to advertise, but there it is. This is from Alan Thompson, and it's kind of an explanation of the model. So basically, they had ChatGPT or GPT-3, which was producing all of these texts in response to prompts, and they added RLHF, real life human feedback. And then when they added that, they were able to put the public beta out. And they've got some other potential applications in the pipeline. One of them is this Web GPT, which could be a Google killer. And what it does is you ask it a question and it produces a paragraph, and then hopefully it will produce links so you can double check. But if you've noticed, Google has kind of declined in value. You start looking for things, and if you choose the wrong word, you might end up with 5 or 6 links on the first page of just sponsored links. You have to go wade through it. So there is clearly something that would be worthwhile that could maybe summarize what the answer is and then let you go and check it out later. So I think we're going to see these smaller apps coming up. Now, to return to that video, another interesting thing was that Instruct GPT needed the human training data. And there was a report, there's a couple of articles out about how they used Kenyans paid at really low wages, and they had to deal with lots of racist and sexist stuff that actually, had them problematically, causing lots of problems. And I don't want to dwell on that, but it kind of points out that what GPT-3 is producing is basically just like a fire hose. So something is narrowing it down, and apparently it's Instruct GPT. And it also noted that the data is 99% English. So as Philip noted, French and German, I think, some other languages, that doesn't do too badly, but it's doing that off of 1% of the data that's correlated with the English data. This is a really interesting article that underlines this, that ChatGPT is multilingual but monocultural, because it's still producing English speaking values, and as Philip noted, most probably North American English speaking values. So that is problematic as well. This is, if you want to know what's going in, what the ingredients are, this PDF is good because it talks about the different data sets. And if you think about the data sets, you might realize why certain things are coming up. So just to doing okay. I got most of this information from YouTube, and these are 4 channels that the people were early adopters or early kind of cutting edge doing GPT-3. And they've talked about how they make apps and what it does and things like that. So I recommend them. They're not language teachers, but it'll help you get an idea of what ChatGPT is. Now, if you're going to use ChatGPT, I really urge you to look under the hood. And if you go to OpenAI and click on the API link, and then you sign up, and it's free, and they give you $18 of credit to make apps, well, to make the prompts that then could be plugged into apps. Now, maybe I'm not super literate on computers, but you should get in there and look how all this is working, because this is the engine. And to break it down just a little, you can see that GPT-3 has 4 text engines: DaVinci, Babbage, Curie, and Ada. And the DaVinci is the best one, but it takes longer. Curie's more for shorter. Each of these is for more shorter things. So you pay a certain amount for each token, and a token is roughly 4 characters of a normal English text. And then you pay this much for its output. I'm not quite sure how all this works, but this is a playground, so you can start putting prompts in to see what happens. Now, another important thing is the temperature. A lot of people have kind of equated this with creativity. So if it's 0, it will produce the same answer every time. But if it's 1, it will randomize the answers maximally. However, it's not creativity. If you look down, it has show probabilities, which if you turn on, you can see what it's going to come out with. And so, for example, and this is an example that was given by one of the YouTube, is if you put my favorite animal is and blank, if you have the temperature on 0, it will produce the most common answer, which is dog. And as you move that temperature more towards 1, it will go through, and you can see the probabilities of the words that would come up. And it makes you realize that this is nothing but a text completion machine on steroids, which is a really good thing to keep in mind. This is a prompt created by Alan Thompson to create a chatbot named Lida. And then ChatGPT takes these ideas, helpful, cheeky, clever, articulate, wise, and considered intelligence, draws on the wisdom of Dan Millman, Thomas Leonard, Werner Erhard, and the Dalai Lama. And then it's using that to create its personality. And you can see on YouTube some examples of that. You can try and create your own chatbot. And there are places that have these sort of apps. Why teachers need to be careful. I'm going to skip through this video, but basically this is Sam Altman saying he didn't have any idea how OpenAI was going to make any money. And he kind of cheekily said that he was going to ask, when they got it good enough, they were going to ask OpenAI to tell them how to make money. I'm not so sure about that. I have a feeling that they're going to adopt the same kind of strategy that's been adopted in other technology. So the Apple App Store, Google Play, things like that, where they create some sort of repository or something of value, and then they give an API an opportunity to interact with it. And then people are going to take on the risk of making the best API, the best app. And so there'll be this 1,000 flowers bloom, and you're going to have to look and see what these apps do to see if you want to use them. And then also to see what kind of price point they're going to be at. And I'll skip through that. You've probably just heard that, or you've heard that Microsoft invested $1 billion and then has invested even more. They've just announced that they're going to roll it into Azure. Their talk about getting it into Microsoft Bing, and some people imagine it's going to be in Microsoft Office. But then if it does go in Office runs about $70 to $100 a year now. So you could easily see it, the ChatGPT version of Microsoft Office being $500, $700, which is going to push it out of the range for institutional use. But you might have students paying that so they can produce things. So what I think is really important for me, and again, I'm dealing with Japanese students, is I think that they need to work on voice to text. So they're going to have to, I'm sure that the voice to text apps are going to be keyed onto native speakers. So the students are going to have to be able to understand how to adjust their output to make sure it's understood. Also, I'm going to recommend that students start using chatbots. I'm not really sure. Philip mentioned that people are not, they find themselves bored when they're dealing with artificial intelligence. I'm really wondering if that kind of research was done on the weird group, Western educated, basically college, American college freshmen. And I wonder if Asians, after looking at the video about Wu Dao and seeing how my students interact, I don't think they're going to have as much of a horror of it. And to kind of underline that, well, there's a point that I want to do at the end that I want to underline that, but here at the moment is where ChatGPT falls down. It starts to lose coherence over sufficiently long passages. So I think that's where I will be trying to work with it. Right now, because it's free, I have sort of a 20-minute, 30-minute every day sitting down with ChatGPT and asking it to churn out stuff that I might use when it goes offline. And so I'm collecting things. Basically, I'm mining it now to get all the stuff that I might use in the future. And so here's one thing. My old version, I asked students to write essays about music videos. And so the first paragraph is information about the song and the video, which has some data that then they have to craft into a kind of chart. This song was written by, and that's done in class. Then I ask them to write a discussion of the meaning of the lyrics and introduce the line markers, and then the story of the video and introduce with the line markers, and then give their summary and opinion. And then those drafts are shared among the students, and the students have to cite other students to create their final version. So here's the ChatGPT version. Is they're going to do this first paragraph as voice to text in class, which might be a bit noisy, but we'll work on that. Then they're going to get a ChatGPT written summary and correct it and annotate it with the line markers. And then same with the video and annotate it, and then do the summary and opinion, and then take those texts and ideally create their final version. So hopefully I can avoid them saying, oh, I'll just write this by saying, please write me a 700-word essay about Ariana Grande's Break Free. Okay, I've got one more minute, so I'll really quickly go through this. In AI, there is a question of alignment, which is, does the goal of the program match the goal of the human? And the canonical explanation of that is the paperclip problem. And it says, imagine a paperclip factory that's given autonomy, and then it can do whatever it needs to do, and it's been told it needs to make paperclips. If it becomes sufficiently powerful enough, it takes all the resources, so everything is paperclips. Now, there's been a lot of argument about this, and if you go to this alignment forum, there's some really interesting discussion. But this, I realized that this is the same problem that we often face in our classes. And this quote I really liked was, ChatGPT will be brutal in classrooms where writing is assigned rather than taught. Our problem with alignment is that our student goals may not be aligned with the teacher goals. And many of our students are more interested in receiving a certificate, a license, or a credit than actually learning to produce the language. And many of those student goals are incorporated in the system and are also incorporated in the culture. And I'm having to wonder if the students are going to, a lot of my challenge has been to try to convince them that learning English in order to be better at English is important. And so what ChatGPT has become is sort of like a universal solvent to say, wait a minute, these aren't aligned. So last thing, and I'm finished, and then we can have chat. I kind of feel this is true because all of the discussion I've seen about ChatGPT in Japan has been primarily translated articles, translated from English to Japanese. And I've been looking, I'm the head of the eCampus Center, and there's been no meetings or discussions or any kind of the panic that I see in the States. And this is like the only thing I've seen. And this was from the Asahi Shimbun, and my translation is kind of ma-ma, but it's a very sort of, gee, kids, what are you going to do about it? There is no moral panic here. And I don't think that we're going to have the moral panic here. So we might have to be working at odds with our administrators, with our colleagues, to try and make sure that we're getting them to appreciate the language. So I'm over, but thank you so much. Thanks to Paul for organizing this, and Philip and Kevin as well. Really interesting thoughts. And that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks very much. Okay. We're at 7:30 now. We had allotted 20 minutes for Q&A, so we're looking to wrap things up before 7:50. I would like to do a bit of a Q&A. We have one question that hasn't been addressed yet from Nicholas Murgatroyd. He says, in terms of equal distribution of the future, how can we liberate ChatGPT from existing stereotypes derived from the text it has scraped? So I think there's two things going on in that question. One might be a reference to the William Gibson quote that Kevin shared. I think it was Kevin, yes, that the future is here, but it's just not equally distributed. And one is about the fact that ChatGPT and other LLMs are trained on text straight from the internet, and they tend to reproduce and regurgitate biases in the training data. So if you guys have any opinions on either of those 2 points, I think that would be good to talk about. Kevin first, maybe. Oh, you're muted.
I know, yes. I don't really have anything about that. Yep.
Okay, Philip? Any comments?
Yeah, I mean, when we look at algorithmic bias in other fields, to think that we'll do anything about it on a project like this seems highly unlikely. Or by the time anything's done, then we'll have moved on. This is a much broader problem than this particular kind of AI. And as a society, we have a lot of talks about ethics and AI. Not much is really being done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. And I also think that education is always the kind of redheaded stepchild. It always gets the money last. So these things are going to play out in other industries, and we're just going to get pulled along for the ride. So I do think that we should prepare ourselves, not by trying to be the leader and figure out what to do with this, but actually figure out, okay, how can we deal with our niche? Sorry about that. Deal with our niche.
Mm-hmm. I think from my point of view, something that Joe mentioned earlier is that OpenAI is trying to come up with ways to exclude, stereotypes and things like that by having a human oversight process, and they're exposing, third world workers to lots of unsavory message board posts, So they're working on it, but the way that they're addressing the issue itself is causing problems of morality, I think, as well. So what about more equal distribution? Will ChatGPT and similar tools be available everywhere, or only in rich developed countries? Anyone have a thought on that?
Well, I mean, the obvious. Go on, Joe.
Looking at the
You
pricing.
go first, please.
Yeah, looking at the pricing, it's not going to happen. I mean, $49, that's a huge amount of money. $500, imagine $500 for Microsoft Office plus ChatGPT. So that's why I really urge teachers to try and get under the hood and see how they could create their own apps. They could do things like that, but they're going to have to work on the margins. I think it's going to be primarily pointed at people pointed at people who need, who they need their money from.
Mm-hmm.
And there will also be legal restrictions when the lawsuits start coming in, that will further.
Mm. I would like to think that they'll maintain a free version, and also have a paid-for version that's differentiated somehow. So I'm optimistic about there always being some kind of a free version. Are you guys not thinking that's going to happen?
At the moment, I think, in a sense, we see what might become more acute. The number of times that I try to get onto ChatGPT and I can't is really quite high. I mean, regular basis. But I do see that if I pay my $49 a month, then I won't have those problems. So we have a differential service already.
They've also mentioned that the compute costs for this free version are quite high, that they're paying a lot of money for the computing power they need to get this. And
That's
so
true.
I'm not as optimistic as you. I think they're going to shut it down in 3 to 6 months.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, one estimate on Twitter was $100 million a day, which it just sounds ridiculous, you know. But they have had a $10 billion investment from Microsoft, which at $100 million a day won't last them that long, I guess. But you know, the money is flowing into the system as well as flowing out at the same time. Yeah.
The estimates I heard were $2 or $3 million a day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's significantly cheaper, but still not cheap.
Yeah.
What we're doing is we're participating in the hype exercise, of course, in many ways. By even organizing an event of this kind, we're contributing to the marketing of this particular product. The second thing that we're doing, of course, by playing around with it, is we're giving OpenAI a huge amount of data, which they will be using and analyzing to try to find out other ways in which they can monetize the whole thing. So they've played this in a very, very clever way, I think. But there comes a point when they simply won't benefit from making it free, and they'll stop doing so.
Well,
go ahead. Sorry.
I just want to hop into another point that Philip was talking about texts and different ideas of texts and what ChatGPT generates. And I would have included it, but we didn't really have time. But I think there's a really interesting angle about authenticity. And if you remember, Widdowson kind of started the whole authenticity. What is an authentic text? And whether we use it in an appropriate way. And obviously this came up with the kind of conversational turn, so that we went to the communicative turn in EFL. And so it was like, oh, we got to stop doing these made up texts for learners. We need to give them real text. And Widdowson had a really interesting idea that he said authenticity doesn't lie in the text, but it relies in the reader's reaction to it. And so now a lot of this discussion about how we use ChatGPT is predicated on what we think is authentic and not authentic. And I'm not sure if we have the same ideas of authenticity as our students do or as other cultures do. So I just wanted to kind of, before I forgot that, but.
I have
the cultural point is really interesting. I've never ever been to Japan in my life. I can't make any comment at all. But my suspicion is, when I look at what I know of Japanese pop culture, that there may be less of a problem than there would be in this part of the world. So we'll have to wait and see on that. It's but the generational thing is also an interesting one. There is clearly a difference in terms of generational attitudes towards privacy between those who are busy TikToking at 15, 16, and those like me in their 60s who just wouldn't touch it with anything at all. So yeah, hard to generalize.
I'd like to just pose a question that follows on from the end of Joe's presentation that I'm really kind of interested in looking at. A lot of the reports in the media have been written by and focusing on the situation in US institutes of higher education, right? They're professors of humanities predicting the death of the essay. And a lot of them, not all of them, but some of them are saying things like, if we now have a technology that can produce a decent B+ level essay that's grammatically accurate, we simply need to raise the bar and say, look, our job now is not to teach basic grammar and basic composition, but to focus on philosophical issues or things like that. My question is, I mean, for ELT teachers, I teach a lot of quite low-level classes, and those students, they do need to learn how to write sentences and paragraphs because they've never learned it and they can't do it, and they can't get to that higher level of debating philosophy until they have those basic building blocks of the means of expressing themselves in a foreign language. I'm just wondering if you guys share that, feeling.
Well, I think there is a point below which you should not use ChatGPT. It would be counterproductive. You do need to get to be able to crawl before you can walk and before you can run. And ChatGPT is running, especially putting in the prompts. So I think, yes, you have, on the other hand, as far as the faculty, I can see high school English teachers just saying, "Oh, this is going to be a beautiful tool. I don't need to stand up in front of people or create create my own English. I can just use ChatGPT for that and offload many of the things like that to students." So I don't think it's going to get any better for students coming up through that. Because
I was kind of that's interesting. I was kind of thinking more about students' tendency to perhaps plagiarize, and just observations in my own classes. I have noticed that students no longer use dictionaries; they use DeepL, and basically if you give them a writing task, they'll type it in Japanese and then just copy and paste the output or copy down the output without really deeply processing it. So that's the kind of concern I have for lower level students, and saying that, oh, well, let's just forget about teaching them basic grammar and focus on higher level, philosophy and things like that, doesn't really apply to ELT context. That's kind of where I was coming from.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's an interesting parallel. I don't know how much your students are using Grammarly, but I've got my students, I'm pushing it on them quite a bit. And I used to have these basically routines that I would do with the students to try to get them to realize certain grammatical points or try to understand why they're making certain grammatical mistakes. I can't do those routines anymore because Grammarly is catching those mistakes. And I'm sad because I like the routines, but I'm also hoping that if the Grammarly keeps telling them to add a definite article here or an indefinite article there, they're going to realize it and pick it up themselves. Because they weren't necessarily picking it up from me, which is why I had to do some sort of comedy routine to put it in their mind. So I see that as a parallel. We might be, but again, the Japanese students, I hate to say, the bulk of them are at such a low level. You get the essays that have at the bottom translated by DeepL because they haven't figured out how to delete that. They haven't read down to the bottom to realize that they should delete that.
It's giving the game away. Yeah. Well, in previous iterations of machine translation, it would translate every subject into it. So if they want to say, like, I like to eat ramen, it would say it likes to eat ramen, and then you'd know it was machine translation. But DeepL doesn't really do that. It's got a lot smarter now. But I think what Joe's saying is where I'm coming from as well. Like the students. What you were saying about them learning grammar from Grammarly is only going to work if they are processing the output in some way. Like if they have an essay that they've written, they paste it into Grammarly, they get the corrected output, they don't even bother to read it, they print it out and hand it in sight unseen, for assessment, knowing that it's probably now perfect or a lot better than it was. That's what I'm saying, that there has to be some kind of learning activity connected to that feedback. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And so sometimes I'm starting to move to having them do it in class so I can see them do it and stop them and say, okay, you know why that's asking that, or you know why that's telling you that. I've also kind of, in my computer literacy class, I asked them to screen record what they're doing so I could see them doing it. And the price of storage is getting cheaper, so it's not a killer now, but I could see at some point saying, please send me a video of you putting your essay into Grammarly and correcting all the points, and then speeding through it to make sure that they've done it.
Right. Again, that seems a little counterproductive in some ways, because it's a time-saving tool that's then causing you more marking to verify that it has actually been done. But I'd like to just answer 2 more questions and read a comment and then wrap up, if that's okay with you guys.
Okay.
Chris Fry is saying he's used language tool when writing Catalan essays and preparing spoken tasks to try to eliminate surface errors. He was open about this with the teacher. He felt it saved the teacher marking unimportant errors, but also made extensive notes on his errors. So maybe he's saying that, you know, when students use these tools, they should be open about it and tell the teacher, look, I use this tool. You know, it's not all me. I've had help, but be open about it. Yeah, that's not
I
really
think
a question.
Chris may not. He might not be the most representative of learners in so many contexts around the world, which is perhaps not the case where you guys work. Teachers are very, very resistant to allowing mobile phones into the classroom. One, because they're a distraction, and 2, because people are going to cheat, or they'll perceive it as cheating. So maybe this new technology is going to be one more reason why teachers won't want mobile technology in the classroom, and you can understand why.
And the other way, it could, you know, we could go the other way and just say, oh, everything is okay, and then just raise the bar for written assignments to make it, you know, so that they need to use that in an effective way to create a wonderful essay. And just
Yeah,
make
but not
much
with the 12-year-old, I don't think. Not with the younger learners, secondary and so on. Maybe in higher education. No.
Lee Arnold is asking whether ChatGPT will release an educational version of, maybe it'll be called, I don't know, Edu GPT or something, I don't know, but like Moodle or LMS, because ChatGPT is a very, very, it's not general intelligence as we've established, but it's quite broad what you can do with it. It's not designed specifically for education. In fact, it's more designed to avoid having to learn rather than learn, in my opinion. It's like, you know, but do you guys think there'll be an educational version?
I know OpenAI, one of the revenue streams they're looking at is to license ChatGPT to other people that create things like legal chat and medical chat in specific areas. So the problem is that education is so general that you really can't confine it at all. So there's nothing to really do there.
Yeah.
And Lee, I was talking to Lee earlier about some things, and so I have to give him credit for this. He said that, you know, it looks like the teacher's journey is from sage on the stage to guide on the side to cop in the shop.
Cop in the shop, okay.
And, you know, I worry about that. And I think that we're going to have to look at, we might have to be passing students who just provide the minimum. I tend to view grades as sort of like a driving test, that if you can drive and not wreck anything, I'll give you a pass. But to get an A or an S, which is what we have here, you know, you have to show that. So I can see myself teaching to that upper class of students and saying, look, I'm happy. You turned in 5 essays. That's great. And I have a sad worry that that's going to be happening a lot in Japan. Wow, the students have gotten so much better. Look at these essays. Where'd they come from? Who wrote them? But it's you know, oh, we're happy with that. We've produced it. We've got the face, so we don't have to worry about, you know, people saying that our English is so bad. And I know that sounds really cynical, but you know, I think we need to really evaluate who we're teaching to. And if we imagine that we're trying to teach everyone in our class to get up to a level, then raising the bar actually is going to, you know, encourage more people to try to get around it. So
I think it's important to show the administration by example and being able to use this in class, how that they should deal with it, because they will, you know, get their ideas from the government, the Monkasho, who gets their ideas from corporations. And so that I think going forward, we really need to show both students and the administration how this can be used.
I do want to make a quick announcement. This is coming from Louise Ohashi and Anthony Aram, who are doing research they would like the attendees of this forum to help them to respond to this survey, tinyurl.com/chatgpt survey. If anyone has a few spare minutes, please go ahead and do that. I'll leave that on the screen. I just want to ask, want to have two, there's more questions coming, but I think we have to wrap up. So I was going to just mention Kevin's comment. Kevin said, why don't we shift the focus to speaking? That is the basis for good writing after all. Okay, I'll read a few of these out and then we can discuss them in one go. Lucy says, not really a question, but this is making me wonder whether we should introduce thinking as a fifth skill. So listening, reading, writing, speaking, and thinking. Okay. and yes, and the others are just kind of like thank yous and things like that. So yeah, any final comments on those, guys?
You know, there's a push for critical thinking, and I'm kind of I always chuckle about it because I think, well, critical thinking would be if you realize that you need to study to get better at English, that would be good critical thinking. So why are we spending all this time trying to get you to get critical thinking when you don't realize that just practicing your English is important to learn English? That's sort of like the first critical thinking point. But speaking, again, here in Japan, we end up trying to do a lot of academic English, which is probably one of the furthest things away from speaking that you could get.
Mm.
And so I think it's a good idea to move back to speaking. But a lot of the structures we have, especially in higher education, is to push students to do academic English. So that's going to run into some problems there.
Just a quick note here. There's still questions coming in, but I think we have to wrap up now. I'd like to invite people to continue the conversation over in our Facebook group, which is facebook.com/group/tiltal. You'll also find the link from Louise there as well, in case you didn't get a chance to copy it down. I'd like to end with thanking the speakers today, Kevin Ryan, Philip Kerr, and Joseph Tomei. And thank you all for coming. This has been by far the most attended Tiltal webinar we've done so far. So thank you very much. And this is obviously a very important subject to a lot of people out there. So let's do another one at some point. And I'm going to stop the recording, okay? And